When the American Civil War breaks out, the actual fighting begins, African Americans are in a really interesting position. You have a large number of free blacks who are living north and south, who are trying to carefully choose their sides in this conflict, recognizing themselves, even if both of these governments are having some level of denial that their conflict is not about slavery. The reality is, particularly for the Confederate states, they make very clear in their incorporating documents, eventually their provisional constitution and the like, that this is going to be a nation built with the primary premise that slavery is a natural right order thing. And so the enslaved population is not seeing this war as anything different, quite frankly. It becomes something different when allies, abolitionists, free blacks, and the like begin to really push hard on this new radical Republican Party. And they are pushing to solve this problem that has plagued the nation from its founding.
From the moment the Civil War begins, free and enslaved African Americans immediately discern the possibility of making the war a war for their own liberation. And they also discern the possibilities for their action. That is, they discern the ways in which they might use the war to pursue their own interests. So in May of 1861, in Virginia, a group of enslaved men who have been put to work at a Confederate fortification escape and present themselves to the Union General Butler and request their freedom. And Butler extends it, right? He refuses to return these men who are being used as laborers by the Confederate military. He refuses to return them either to the military or to their owners. And that's 3 weeks into the war. So very immediately, enslaved people understand that the presence of the Union military, as well as wartime chaos, offers them opportunities to free themselves. And they do it in vast numbers. Men, women, children, individuals, families, communities seize the opportunity to liberate themselves simply by leaving their masters' farms and plantations.
And I think that one of the things that's so fascinating, you know, everyone talks about the Emancipation Proclamation and how that comes into being and how much political maneuvering Lincoln had to do. We cannot forget that there are two really important military actions that take place prior to that. It's the first Confiscation Act, and then there's the second Confiscation Act that follows. But even before those, what happens at Fortress Monroe in Hampton, Virginia is extremely important because 3 enslaved men who have been assigned to dig trenches around Norfolk and Hampton roads to protect Confederate strongholds decide to run away because they know Fortress Monroe is being held by the Federals. And they get in a boat and they row across the water and they get to the Fort Monroe and they immediately seek asylum. General Benjamin Butler is the commander of that fort at the time. He's also a brilliant lawyer, absolutely brilliant lawyer. And he is playing with this idea, wait a minute, in rules of engagement, in rules of war, property can in fact be seized if it aids the enemy. Since the South insists that slaves are property, then I shall seize it. And once I seize it, I can do with it what I choose. And so what he does is he essentially sets up a system where property confiscation, and you come here, you provide labor to me, and I'll set you free. So by the time we actually get to May of 1862, it's already been close to a year that this is happening, that slaves are getting word that they can, in fact, run off, get to a federal line, and freedom will be granted, even though there's no official policy per se about that yet. So it is purely a military action. But that military action starts to take on social significance, and the aims of the war begin to change. And as these northern soldiers who are making their way into southern lands are seeing for themselves for the first time what slavery really looks like, it begins to have a profound effect on their psyche. By the spring of 1863, African Americans are in the field en masse, and they are serving far better than even their worst detractors can imagine. There were those who have said or tried to use them as cannon fodder, the first line, so that folks would come in. But even in those circumstances, their numbers of casualties are not significantly different. They are proving themselves, and they are winning. There are some great stories. I think most people may be familiar with the Massachusetts 54th simply because there was a movie about it. But what they may not be as familiar with, for example, are the stories of actually what happened here, even on the peninsula in Virginia, at a place called Newmarket Heights. This is an area where Confederate forces had held that ground for quite some time. There had been 2 previous assaults to take that place by Union soldiers, and they were never, ever able to capture it. They just couldn't do it. But in September of 1864, one last assault was being made because there was a grand push to get to Richmond. There had always been a push to try to take Richmond, but this was the next push. And the United States colored troops were called in to lead the assault. They lead the assault, they take the batteries, and they win the position. Only 16 men of African descent would receive the Congressional Medal of Honor for valor. 14 of those men received that medal for their actions at the Battle of Newmarket Heights. And they continued to press on and would also serve in Petersburg when Petersburg falls. So they are present even at Appomattox. And again, it is an extraordinary story of their service and of their valor in the field, of being able to prove by the sword that they were worthy of citizenship.